You know, in this current year of insert year here, many of you watching this might be simple-minded plebeians, still playing games on just one screen. That's pretty lame though. What if you could double your entertainment output? 2 screens at once. Twice the fun. It might be easy to forget, but less than a decade ago, this was the hot new thing. It wasn't actually that new back then, but it was a thing. Playing games on a TV while also managing a tablet or phone at the same time. It was dark times indeed. But how did we get here? How did we get to a point where any functioning adult saw this and said, yes, this is a good idea. This is what the people want. This all has a longer legacy that predates these notable outings. And today, I just want to talk about that. The second screen. But many of you may be asking, what is a second screen? I mean, like you can have 2 screens, but what is a second screen experience? So I define this as you have access to 2 screens at once. You got one on the TV and you got one in your hands, and they both have different images at the same time. In any mainstream capacity, this starts with the Dreamcast. You might remember this thing, the VMU memory card, which remains the coolest of all the memory cards. You would take this thing and you'd shove it in a controller and you'd get the second screen right there. The screen resolution was 48 by 32, so not quite HD. The monochromatic screen also really gave it some Tamagotchi vibes, which I gotta imagine it was inspired by given the time frame here. It's pretty fascinating for what it does. In games it could display basic information and stats and simple maps, and even stuff like this. That's supposed to be a sniper scope. Most developers wouldn't really put a ton of time into this feature, especially for games simply ported over to the Dreamcast from other machines, so most of the time you just see a static image or a logo. Even though this is really a pioneer in second screen technology, its most interesting aspects are when you don't use it as that. You could take your chows and you could put them in this and you could have weird Tamagotchi fun with your chows. Now this thing is brought up a lot, and its popularity is mostly there because it wasn't a niche accessory. It was mandatory. This was also just your memory card. Now other console manufacturers seem to take away a few elements from this, and it wasn't the second screen part. Instead, most were interested in the connectivity and the portable nature of it all. The idea of being able to take your games on the go, the console games, the real games, but progressing in any of these titles while you're not at home, that was a neat idea. The Nintendo 64 transfer pack allowed to, on occasion, transfer data from Game Boy to 64 titles and vice versa. Conceptually, it fits in with a lot of the VMU ideas, without that second screen and without that portability, but there was not a second screen in any capacity. I mean, it's just something you plugged into the controller. Interestingly, Sony did create a portable device well before the PSP. It was a Japanese exclusive, and it looks nearly identical to the VMU. It did pretty much exactly what the VMU does without the second screen option. You could take mini games on the go, and it was a memory card. But the only catch is it needed to be plugged into the PlayStation, so you can't use it at the same time. As the next generation of hardware launched, it seemed pretty clear that second screen gaming had potential, primarily on the GameCube. Yes, if you had a Game Boy Advance and this link cable, you could plug it into this. You remember that? It was good times. Now, for most use cases, it was pretty standard fare. You could trade your Pokemon from the XDs to the Emeralds, or you could use a Game Boy as a controller, but select titles took a lot more advantage of what this could do. The best example is Legend of Zelda 4 Swords. You could really get a Wii U style game back in the early 2000s this way. You had the main screen on the TV where all the characters would mostly be, but if you ventured off screen and away from your friends, you could just look at the GBA and could just do whatever you wanted. That's pretty cool. That's about as second screen as it gets, right? Animal Crossing allowed for some asynchronous gameplay, which was pretty cool, but most interesting to me is Wind Waker, because the Game Boy would function essentially as a Wii U would in the future, being just a compass and other sorts of UI elements. Going forward, we'd see the PSP get remote play functionality with the PS3. As far as I remember, it was just a direct mirror of whatever was on the PS3, but with mid-2000s internet. The Wii to DS did offer the same capabilities as the GBA link cable, without the need for the cable, but it also wasn't taken advantage of almost ever. In very select games, you could connect a DS to the Wii and either control the game or have specific information provided on the DS. In a lot of ways, these sort of experiments seem to build straight into the Wii U concept. However, it went a bit differently than they might have been expecting. Given the history of second screen gameplay, at this time a lot of people were comparing it directly to the VMU and the GBA link cable. The alternative comparison was this is a big old DS, but with much less practicality since you have to move your head from the TV to the screen. Now the Wii U has been talked about, again, just a lot, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but simply taking a look at something like Star Fox Zero and how the implementation of a second screen kinda killed the game, the sheer absurdity of being forced to do this, the fact that this gimmick is literally right in front of your face 24/7, well, I think that just says it all. But this whole time frame of the Wii U being born and killed, that spans a good few years. And during those few years, the jury was still out on whether second screen experiences would be the next motion controls, and nobody wanted to be behind the curve again. At the same time, remember that in the early 2010s, the smartphone was the next big thing. It was the biggest thing. And on paper, to a lot of journalists and analysts that weren't really playing video games, they assumed that people were gonna be moving away from their controllers and consoles and PCs to these things. Now the idea that smartphones would replace consoles or PCs, it's pretty funny now. And it was pretty funny back then too. There was a huge initiative across the board to create second screen experiences. Not only could this play in part with what Nintendo was reportedly doing for their next console, but it could also tie together consoles in this newfangled smart device industry. This would give us the worst incarnation of second screen experiences. The idea was to hold a controller and play a game traditionally, and then when you needed the second screen experience, you would take your hands off the controller and you'd pick up your phone and manage your inventory or look at a map or something. Xbox Smart Glass. What we saw demonstrated was controlling Madden plays on the iPad, joining Halo matches on the iPad. The motivation here seems fairly clear-cut. Phones were big. The Wii U would probably be big. And this manifested far beyond just the Xbox ecosystem. Companion apps would pop up, offering features like having the Pip-Boy on your phone, or having the, that on your phone. But with Smart Glass, it was a little different. You could control your Xbox with your phone. I remember the novelty of controlling an already slow console menu with a slower touch interface over the internet, which was slow. Remember, this was announced in 2012, and just a year later, the new consoles would launch. And surprisingly, a few Xbox One titles did support it at launch. But within a year, it was dead, for obvious reasons. Sony also got into this game maybe a bit later. See, the PS Vita could connect to the PS4 to play games without looking at the TV. At the same time, you apparently could use some of these mobile apps on the Vita and treat it like it's a Wii U, but this is all really bad. Just the worst. Given the popularity of this concept, it died really fast. I think in part this was due to the fact that phones were not taking over the console market, the Wii U was not a success, and people simply weren't using these features. By 2015 or so, it was all over. Not only had Microsoft given up smart glass, but a lot of other gimmicky feature sets. And in some ways, it's kind of sad. I think innovation in any industry is important. Anything can be labeled as a gimmick when it's new, and then when they become mainstream, they become essential. I think a lot of second screen's history is pretty fascinating, and a lot of these attempts warrant praise. But once we pass the Wii U era and enter this kind of stuff, frankly, it just feels like cynical marketing. An attempt by executives who don't know better, trying to stay hip while not understanding what's hip. And I can't imagine second screen experiences ever coming back again, to be honest. I think it was one of those rare cases where technology seemed to be building towards something great, towards mainstream appeal. And once it got there, nobody wanted it. But in other ways, it did make it, just not in this form. I mean, the DS. The DS was 2 screens. It did virtually everything that this kind of tech could offer without shifting your head from the screen to the TV and back again. Most of the appeal of this kind of technology seems to have worn its welcome with the DS and, well, its successors. But the difference is the DS worked because it was in your hands all the time. It worked because it wasn't on a television. The fact that nobody really tries this stuff anymore and hasn't tried for half a decade makes me believe this is the end. Sort of closing the book on this weird technology. Maybe in a few decades they'll look back on the weirdos of the past who used 2 screens instead of 1. What an odd time that was. A time that is now over. Oh, come on.